Hi guys, we are back in my first ever lesson from Kraig, a 2000 rated player who got from 600 to 2000 in just a couple of years. Fantastic player. He's just given me some analysis on my openings, and now we're going to go into specific games I've played, and he's going to tear me apart. So grab a cup of coffee and enjoy. Over to Kraig.
Cool, thanks for that. Okay, so what I basically did here is I looked at the last 10 games that you've played, mostly rapid. I think there's two Blitz games that you played yesterday in there as well, but otherwise, like 8 out of 10 are rapid games. So I've only got them very briefly in a spreadsheet here for my own benefit, just so that I've got all the links to hand and I've got the colours and the openings that you played and then some comments that I noticed. So we'll dive into the first one and we can talk through what your thoughts were and any observations I had, which I think would be useful to share. So you may recognise this one. So you played this yesterday, I believe, and it started off, you were playing as black. And I think my general sort of comments on this one, if I bring this spreadsheet back into play, what I've effectively did is I've given myself a column for what decided the game, and I'll aggregate the main reasons, and I'll sort of tell you at the end, like, what are like the three key things you have to focus on,
Fantastic.
basically. All right. So what I'll do is I'll actually just jump to the critical moment so that we can get through as many games as possible. I'll just mute this because I have my own sound effects on. And this is a Caro can, and we're just going to jump to the critical moment where basically the eval shifts dramatically. So right now you're playing pretty well here. Cool. So this is probably where I wanted to stop. So this is roughly an equal game. Like, we can talk at length about the game itself, but I do have 10 to get through, and really the critical reason why this one failed. So this was a stalemate or a draw. Your opponent was actually winning this, but they allowed a stalemate, and then basically it came back to winning for them. And then I think you misplayed a pawn push, and it went back to losing, and then they misplayed but back to winning. But ultimately, we just sort of exposed the reasons or what you should be thinking about in this type of ending. So we'll go through it here, and right now, so White's winning here primarily just because they've got their king's going to be able to stop your pawn. You're going to have to always worry about this pawn, and usually the general plan here in a pawn ending like this is your king will ultimately get distracted over here, and then White can just make a beeline for your pawns while you're having to stop this, and then it's just basically you can't win it. So that's ultimately like the loose plan for this type of position. So what happens here is that your opponent they push this, they overextend this pawn such that you can actually grab this and still make it back to your pawns. So your opponent misplayed this here, and ultimately you went into this sort of drawn endgame here. And the move I want to stop at is now, because I think this is where you make the critical mistake in the ending. So talk me through, I'll turn the analysis off here so that you can't see anything, but so you probably can see the moves, but just try and not think about this too much. But just looking at the board, you played the move a5, right? And I just want you to calculate what will happen if you can after a5 is played. What do you expect, or what are the options that White can play?
Yeah, so they took, and I think if they take, which I calculated, it was okay for me. But they can push here as well, and that
So
looks a
yeah,
bit better for them.
if they take, it's a draw, as you calculated. If they push, I just want you to start thinking about what would you play now.
It's got to be King C7.
King C7. And from here, I don't know how much time you spent on pawn endgames, but there's a sort of well-known technique. It's basically it's called shouldering or opposition as well. But basically, after king here, the ultimate result is your king can't come into opposition and throw me off track. So you're going to have to move away, and I'm ultimately going to be able to get my way in here and take this pawn, and it's unstoppable. So for example, no matter where you move, if you move here, we're just going to move along and take. That's unstoppable. And if you try and move, for example, back the way, then we will just come in and oppose the king as well. And again, it's throwing you back. And eventually you've lost the pawns again.
Yeah.
So just the easy way to think about this in an endgame is that, like, if the pawns are locked like this, there's a high chance you're not going to be able to hold this position. So you don't want to voluntarily allow this.
And that's
type
all
of move.
because that B pawn is controlling that C6 square. So that's just a stronger structure for white, right?
Yeah, so basically white is a lot closer to this pawn than you are to this pawn. Because for you to make any progress, you have to actually get rid of this guy to undermine this.
Mm.
And then it's just a case of, okay, who's faster to this versus you having to walk all the way around to this. And the fact that you can't actually really hold on to this because you're going to be in Zugzwang, which basically means that you don't have a good move to play, no matter where you move. The white king is just going to try and oppose you and push you back. So all I would say is in this position, you don't want to allow them to fix the pawns just because you know that for you to make any progress, you're going to have to go all the way around there, which isn't realistic. So a better move could just be to try and just hold your ground and let them come to you and exchange the pawns. For example, if they push, then you can exchange, and there's no way.
So there, Craig, if I'd pushed instead with that B5, that wouldn't be the same because it's not as high advanced up the board. And the king's not as good.
Yeah, it's still losing for black just because, again, you're still not going to be able to get here compared to how I'm going to get here. So like, it doesn't matter which pawn you push. What you're basically doing is you're forever cementing in winning chances for white because like you're going to get boxed in a lot easier. Like for you compared to white, like white is almost no risk here. Like you're never going to be able to get all the way past white and get in here before they can do something. Whereas you always have to watch like your moves, and like there are mistakes that white can make here. So it's not when I say risk free, it's risk free for white not to lose it, but they can still stumble into a draw. Like for example, if they play a move like this, then you can take opposition. They can't throw you off it because to get here, they're not going to be able to get past it and undermine that pawn. But if they play correctly and oppose you, you are going to get pushed away. This whole sort of shouldering concept or long opposition concept, you're eventually going to get pushed away and they're in. So if you ever want to look into that or spend some time on that, just look at some pawn endgame exercises, particularly with 2 pawns on the board. There's a lot of different tricks. We all know when we first start out the king and pawn versus 1 king technique, where you're basically, I don't know if you've ever done that before, but the idea is that you walk your king out in front of your pawn and use your king to sort of like it's an opposition exercise, but you basically outflank the king up to the board and it allows your pawn to promote. And you learn quite a lot about just how the kings interact with each other. And the more you build on that, add 2 pawns versus 1, or add 1 pawn versus 1, or add 2 pawns versus 2, you'll start to it just really cements in this whole technique about how to use opposition and get into places that black doesn't want you to get into in this particular position. But yeah, so this is just a pure calculation exercise, and I sort of aggregated this on the spreadsheet. Is what decided the game was a pawn end game, and what I've got here, the depth column basically just means how many moves you would have had to have calculated ahead to refute or see the issue.
Chess goals exposed right now. If I'd just seen one move ahead.
But see, to be honest, I did this analysis for my own games, for like 50 games, and the vast majority are 2 moves or 1 move sometimes. So it's not like you have to think like 5 moves ahead. Some people, like when they first start out, they think like a really strong player is seeing like 3 or 4 moves ahead. For the most part, it is literally just 1 move will stop the blunder, or 2 moves at most, which is usually during like a tactical exchange. It's very rare that you have to really think deep. But this is just the time where it's easy to make a move that looks safe, and then we just don't see that it's actually a mistake. So that's basically the pawn endgame stuff. So again, if we were in a proper lesson where we're working this over time, that's probably where I would introduce some pawn endgame exercises for you to really just get concrete with opposition, long opposition, all these sort of outflanking moves. Because when you learn that takes you up a whole increment of just endgame expertise that you can bring into all your games. But I'll give you that as a header to take away. And again, you can search it on YouTube. you can go onto the tactics trainer on chess.com and you can go into custom puzzles and just tick pawn endgames if you want to drill those as well. That's another way you can train. But yeah, pawn endgames generally. Also, you can just be able to search some exercises and some booklets, and I'm sure you'll get some stuff from there as well.
Yeah.
Or obviously, I could work with you in the future on that as well. But yeah, that's one. That was a decisive factor in this game. Does that all make sense? Does that kind of that whole shouldering?
That's really
Yeah.
really useful. Embarrassingly, I have done a few videos and stuff on opposition, and like when I do the exercises, I can do it, but applying that to a game is a different thing, isn't it? Like,
Yeah, and it's all that's the thing. It's like just the time to realize, okay, this is one that requires calculation.
Yeah.
This is the time to stop. But that was that game. This game was another game we looked at. So you played this 2 days ago. So we'll just fire straight into it. So this was another Roy Lopez game. So this is another one where you played this. So you can see in the database here, D4's played like 140,000 times. D3 I think is down there. So you just want to be going for the center here. The usual planning that I sort of tend to play, which doesn't mean that you have to play either. But I usually just like to castle as soon as possible, get the rook out, and just try and get rid of these pawns so that you can start trying to do some damage here. Also, taking is an option, just because it gives you this isolated pawn and the double pawn weakness to go after. D3 is fine as well. It's not a mistake. Well, it's slightly inaccurate just because it's not as ambitious as basically some of the other moves there. But yeah, so this was played. And I'll go through to the sort of critical reason why I think this game sort of ended here. This was a good sacrifice, actually. And your opponent made a big mistake here, because basically what he's allowing you to do is win a piece effectively. After this, like, you win this knight, so that was all good. And then
I messed up so bad here. I should have cashed in, shouldn't I? And I was trying to mate him.
Yeah, so there's a couple of opportunities here. One thing I would have said though. Okay, so we'll let it sort of play out. So, okay, so yeah, there was a moment that I actually pointed out somewhere around here. This move here. So on reflection, you played this move, which is still fine. You can see the engine says it's still +8 regardless of what you do. But in these types of positions,
de-risk.
I think it's worth it to de-risk. You see the analysis will probably still say it's winning. Yeah, so it's actually still the same.
Yeah.
Because you're then forking, and then you're also winning this pawn. So what the net result is, you're actually up like 4 pawns here.
Yeah.
And it's like complete, like, even though you don't have queens on and it's not as flashy of a game, it's just, as you said, de-risking the game. You can't lose now. You're 4 pawns up.
Yeah.
Like, so that's. I don't know how often or how inclined you are to generally simplify towards endgames. But really, the reason why this guy was able to get any momentum, I think, is because he still had a lot of activity to play for.
Yeah.
And I think his queen stayed on the board. He managed to pick up both rooks. Eventually, so yeah, de-risk. I basically just exchange when you get the opportunity to. I know it's like a basic principle, but these principles ring true quite often. Not every time, but there's definitely a lot to play for here.
Yeah.
So this is all good. This is still fine, still winning. And yes, I noticed. I noted down some comments around this as well. You use your queen quite a lot here. Probably you want to bring in your knight as well, so you can see the engine saying bring in the knight. There's just an extra piece that, because if you're ever trying to mate, for example, you can never do it with the queen on its own, which obviously I'm sure you're aware of. But this just adds in, like, now you actually have legitimate mate threats of like putting the king in the back rank and mating here, or if the king moves over, like checking here. You just need this extra piece in. You can see the engine saying the only way to really survive this is to actually give up the queen.
That was just blindness. I think
that's what it was.
I was talking to myself at the time, saying I need to get this knight involved somehow.
Yeah.
Because I knew that then it might be mating, and I just couldn't see that involving the knight at all.
Yeah. So black just managed to come back here, and I think one other thing I noticed. So let's just go to the end of this game. I think, like, the net result here was what would have ultimately have saved this game, because I think your opponent actually equally blunders as frequently because it's went from like -9 to equal again. The game actually ended. I think you maybe flagged on time. Yeah. But ultimately, what I think decided the game was probably just getting into the habit of simplifying when you're ahead. That straight away would have de-risked the whole position. So whenever you're 2 pawns ahead, 3 pawns ahead, even though there may still be some like flash still to play in the position, I would just play safe generally and just simplify down and win the end game. It's too easy to win when you're 4 pawns up and there's no queens on the board. There's like no play for black at all.
Yeah, I think that was like a temperament ego issue.
Yeah,
I loved my position. I fell in love with it a bit too much. This whole attack.
yeah,
Normally I would trade down at, but sometimes
yeah. And your position is great,
yeah,
which I mean, it's just as great trading down. You could see with the engine was basically saying continuing queen checks was still +8, exchanging off was still +8. But practically speaking, whenever you leave your opponent's queen on the board, they always have that puncher's chance
yeah,
to come back and do something, whereas they don't have that when you exchange off. Also, one other observation I've got, obviously, outside of the whole queen exchange thing, you get in a lot of trouble because of your king's position in this game. Like, ultimately, both rooks were lost because they were connected. Eventually, the queen comes down and skewers you and gets the other rook as well.
yeah,
I don't know if this is a habit of yours or just the way you play, but all these games in red are games where not castling contributed to the loss of your game or not castling early. So all of these red games, you didn't castle in the first 10, 12 moves or so. So you basically didn't castle during the opening phase. And in some way or another, they would have contributed to, as I go through the game, I'll show where in quite a few cases it was like key moments for not being castled. Your opponent got too much pressure on you and you're having to sort of like make ugly moves to try and survive. But from what I gather, it seems like, I mean, you're developing really, you're looking to develop everything basically. But I would still say you want to really castle as soon as you can, even if another piece at the other side of the board, like another knight over the other side, isn't developed yet. They say there's like these general principles that you want to castle in the first like 10 moves. Some people say the first 8 moves. A lot of the games where you're castling is castling on like move 9 or 10, which is fine, but there's a lot where you're either not castling or it's like you're castling move 15, literally. So I would just say you will also just naturally get rid of some of the pressure that comes upon you by castling earlier in the game.
yeah.
And I know that's like a basic principle, but I don't think the payoff of getting that extra piece out often isn't worth it for having your king stuck in the center for longer than it needs to be.
It's something I've relearned over and over again, been
Yeah,
punished for and relearned, and it's good to hear it from you as well, just to drill it
yeah,
in. But,
because it's good because I saw this video. You might see it on my screen.
oh yeah,
And basically, it was a similar thing. I was watching this just in preparation for the lesson because I wanted to get an idea of your thought process during the game. And this was another move where, like, if you remember, it's like I think the guy sacked the knight on the pawn, but you couldn't recapture it because of this skewer idea. Because of this, like, if you take, the queen comes down and wins both rooks, basically.
yeah, exactly.
And if I don't know if you can hear the audio here, but I do want to just play it for your benefit and your viewers again. If it comes out, let me know if you can hear this. Can you hear that?
No, I think you turned your volume off.
All right, okay. But basically, you said this is why you've got to castle, guys.
Did I?
So,
At
so
least I
we
recognize it.
yeah, so we definitely just to reinforce that into you because I know like these things, especially when you've been playing for a while, like, you know, like what to do and what's a bit sort of ambitious. But castling, like when I looked at even your 10 most recent games, you're not castling or castling too late, and the majority of them is giving you some trouble here. So you can see like you're obviously also peaking, so you're playing all the people who are as good or if not better than you. So that's going to have its own challenge as well. But definitely not castling allowed a lot of pressure to build up on you quite a lot of the time. So I would just say try and get back into that habit of castling pretty much as soon as you can,
Yeah.
like move 5, move 6, move 7, but not into the teens.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, next game, and I'll just bring my notes on the other screen. But okay, so again, you're playing as white here. So we're in, I think this is called the Philidor opening. And we'll just go through it until we get to some critical points here. So what I said here was that the main reason it decided this game was I did actually put not castling contributed to this game, slipping away, and also not anticipating opponents' threats. And lastly, another plan that we'll get into the plan in a moment. I don't want to spoil that. I'll ask you about it when that presents itself. But sometimes we have to pause and just think, what's the only way I can have a chance here? How can I possibly win? And when you ask yourself that, that gives you the plan is what to do. So we can see when that opportunity arises. But we'll just continue with this. All good stuff so far. By the way, there was this. I saw this engine sort of line. Just if you're interested, I don't know if you recognise this game. This is one of your last played rapid games from a few days ago. But there was a sort of crazy line. I don't know if you can see this evaluation is +6.
Yeah.
So when you took back the knight, it was equal, and that's the human move to do anyway. So don't blame me for missing this because I probably wouldn't have played it either. But if the king takes, they're basically potentially getting mated depending on what they do. But like if they move, for example, like there's just this huge attack coming in where the king's basically getting chased all the way along there and gets mated if you follow the line. Not something a human would actually really spot, but I just thought it was quite crazy when it went from +6 to out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we'll continue down your game. So yeah, so you took back, they took your knight, and then you pushed this pawn. So this is the first moment where I think the game starts to slip. So right now you're definitely better. You played the opening better, even though the pawn structures on both sides are compromised. I still prefer your position until this move. It just allows this bishop to come in and give a check, like just a free check, but it sort of shatters it just makes your whole.
Sorry, guys.
That's one slip. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I think we just cut out for a second.
Right, okay.
We're back. So the bishop check disrupts the whole cohesion.
Yeah, so I was just saying, basically, before you're playing these moves, you just need to double check this diagonal. Again, it's a thing I'm sure you're aware of, but I think this also just came because the king wasn't castled yet. It's another opportunity for your opponent to come in and start causing some slight issues here, and they're able to get safe. So we just need to make sure we are castling when we can. But we'll continue down here. And okay, so this is not a key moment yet. Let's just get into the point here. Okay, cool. So this is the moment where I thought I would sort of go over it with you again. Now, obviously, it's slightly spoiled because the engine move is highlighted. But what we have to think about in this type of position is who position do you prefer right now? Blacks or yours? Irrespective of the engine evaluation, which says you're winning.
Oh, like mine. The open rook. Then their knight is horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah. And what's your plan? If I said a plan, like how do you win this position?
Yeah, double up on the H file.
Yeah. So right now, so that's once you realise, okay, so what's really bad about Black's king is this H file is open. Then the plan becomes clear. Okay, well, we just have to get rid of everything on the H, like just trade this off, and then the H file is open and ready for it. Yeah. So I think you played queen out, but basically just to give you an idea of what the moves would have looked like, it would have just been something like this. Well, let's just see what the engine wants to do. Yeah, it takes with check, you just block it, and then simply you're just bringing the rook up to double up.
Yeah.
And that's basically, the queen has to sack to stop it because it's basically too fast, this attack. And this just comes from saying, okay, well, how do I attack the king? Well, the only thing that's really stopping me is this H file, so let me just clear it out. Yeah. And then that's it. There's no way to stop that, really. So that's basically just, general advice when it comes to any sort of position where we're not too sure what to do. Always just come back to, okay, how do I actually win this game? Because if it's like a pawn ending, you'll realise, okay, well, my king needs to be like up here to protect or pass a pawn, or if it's whatever the position is, you can start figuring out moves that you wouldn't intuitively come up with if you don't ask yourself, like, what's my chance here?
Yeah.
And then just sort of asking yourself about, okay, well, realistically, I have to do some kind of attack on the king. I've got the rooks up here. need to get their pieces out the way. Let's just start clearing them out the way. Whether it's like even queen here and rook up, or rook up and doubling up just to go for this, either or. But ultimately, it's just asking yourself that will give you that clear, definitive plan.
I think
And there's nothing black to do.
I think I knew the plan in that position. I just think maybe I don't have the same appreciation of tempo that you do. I was just sort
Yeah.
of messing about, like when I had the opportunity to just open it up.
Yeah, you
I
don't
was
want. You
I
don't,
was going to try double up before I take the bishop and build at it, and just a bit too slow.
yeah, yeah. Sometimes it can be too slow, and it's just often giving them that one extra move. Like for example, I think when we played Queen here, see it goes from +9 to 0,
Yeah.
just because they've got a chance to bring their knight in and protect and potentially just get a bit more safer. It's not as urgent. But so ultimately, not castling was a contributory factor, I would have said. And then this sort of idea with the plan. But let's just see what happens because it's still an equal position. So I just want to see. This is a sideline. So coming back to the real game. So I think basically, yeah, just what happens here is that we ultimately get forced to simplify off. They manage to grab a couple of pawns and then force an exchange of the queens, and now it's just a simple. They're 3 pawns up in the end game. So your opponent's doing the right thing where even if they're 2 pawns up, to be honest, I try and exchange the queens because it's just de-risking position, like what you said. But yeah, so I think there's another move here that happens. Yeah, this one. So just allow the skewer. I don't know if the guy plays it or not. Yeah, he does. So maybe just something like that, which again isn't really ideal because your rook's bad anyway because it doesn't have a lot. But just double checking where we're moving it before we do it. Which again, in a 10-minute game with no increment, these things happen. So I would say like before then, really it's just about getting castled first of all. That would stop your king being in a awkward position. That didn't lose it for you though. Well, it did here because obviously your king was misplaced. But until that point, that plan coming up, how do I basically attack the king as quickly as possible? Asking yourself those questions as part of your checklist. I know we're always sort of in tune to look for checks, captures, and threats. When that's not on the position, I'll ask myself like, okay, what pieces of mine are bad? Do I have like a bad rook? Okay, how do I get that into the game? So on and so forth. But I'll also see like, okay, well, is there any weaknesses? So I don't know how much time you spent just on the subject of targeting weaknesses and identifying what those are. So like weak pawns come to mind. How can I start building up pressure on this potentially because that's a backwards pawn. It can't be protected by another pawn. So we ask ourselves all these sort of miniature plans, and obviously one of them is okay, they're king. We have this open file. Can I take advantage of that? What's the quickest way to blast that open? And these sort of plans are just clearing everything off with a bishop and rook coming in. That would just intuitively come once you ask yourself, how do I get in there? So yeah, that's just a quick recap on that game. Anything off that game that makes sense or doesn't make sense, or you want to chat about?
I'm too slow. That's my takeaway.
And that's just, but yes, just be more going for the kill. Basically, whenever you sense that, like you've got your rooks lined up, all they have is one thing blocking it. Like, how do we get rid of that piece? Because you want it in there as soon as you can. So another get Caro here, and I think this game you were maybe just playing a bit too fast. Really, the reason why I think this one slipped away, I think we just gave away a free piece, but then our opponent actually plundered their queen and we didn't see it. I don't know if you remember this one 4 days ago. So that we'll just keep flying through it until we get to the critical moment.
Yeah, I remember there was a game where I could have trapped the queen with a rook.
So this, yeah, when I say blunder a piece, it was blundering an exchange. So here, you decided to take the pawn and you sort of voluntarily gave up the exchange, which just gives white too much firepower here. Like with the open board and 2 rooks, you can see they're +3 here.
Yeah.
So like, I just wanted to double check, was this, because you see how you spent a minute and a half, a minute and 45 seconds on this move. So was there something you were worried about here with sort of, I know it was 4 days ago, but just even intuitively now, if you've seen this in a blitz game, like what thoughts sort of fly through your your mind here?
I think one of my deficiencies is I get overly worried about structure. I know we've spoke. I'm a little bit
Mhm.
more positional than you, maybe.
Yeah,
So I was terrified of taking my knight, which actually doesn't
yeah,
ruin my structure. I recapture with the queen, but that crossed my
yeah.
mind, and I don't know why I did that. Why didn't I just bring a rook, move the rook to either the C file or
That's
D file?
yeah. Just bring the rook, activate the rook. This rook will come here
Yeah,
at some point, or you can even just sort of like obviously when this bishop goes away, double up if you want. Just obviously have to be aware of back rank as well when you lift up the rook off the back. But yeah, I think just sort of voluntarily or not spotting it, but just giving away this exchange just made it.
Oh, maybe I was thinking there's a fork on E3, but I think they hit the queen. Knight E3.
Got you like some kind of thing here.
If they take, I go there. But I saw that
Yeah,
the rook would have pinned. It would have been awful.
yeah,
Oh, the queen would have pinned.
yeah. But okay, so we'll just see through here real quick what happened. I think this is the moment where your opponent actually makes a mistake. They actually allow you to change two queens off for the two rooks for the queen. And yeah, I think just this again, just probably time pressure. You've got a minute left, but
Yeah. I was one of the ones I saw like a split second after I let go of the piece.
yeah, and it's funnily enough, like practically speaking, this is difficult to hold because the queen is just really awkward. It can fly everywhere.
Yeah.
So I don't really sort of rate the fact that it's a draw because that's quite difficult to actually draw. The rest is sort of yeah, the rest is just kind of is what it is type thing. But yeah, I guess the main thing here with him is just this decision to or this worry about the pawn structure, the positional aspect of the pawns, and giving up the exchange voluntarily was probably just a bit too much to give your opponent.
Yeah.
Even though that the opponent ultimately blundered again, and that's what happens in these games anyway, where you still manage to equalise the position. But yeah, cool.
I think I just saw the fork and it was like a non-concrete thing. Even though I
Yeah,
knew it didn't really work, I thought, oh, there might be something here.
yeah.
Overly optimistic.
The next game. So this one, you won this game, but I still put it in here because it's still useful to understand like why did you win it, like what decided the game, what was your opponent's mistake, and you can learn from that as well. So your opponent's mistake here was poor calculation ultimately, and not seeing that you had a tactic to win the rook. But you actually also immediately after that there was actually a tactical shot to win your rook back, but they missed it. So I'll still expose that to you just so that you're aware of that tactic because it's quite a common tactic. The opponent just never executed it, and if you're not punished for that, you'll probably not instinctively be looking out for it in the future. So at least if I expose it now, you might look out for it if it happens again. So we'll just continue down this sort of line until it gets interesting. Except like okay, so here is the big moment. All right, so this is just a classic discovered check that picks up
Yeah.
the queen and ultimately the rook, because after the rook recaptures, I win the rook as well.
Yeah, I think
So
I saw
yeah,
it shortly after and moved out of that situation.
yeah. So your opponent, yeah, they missed it, which is fine. It sits us. Uh, it's back on the board here, and then this is when they just make a huge mistake and just actually allow you to win a rook. So
Yeah.
now you're just completely winning. There's nothing they can do about it,
I got away with that, didn't I?
and they just resign. But yeah, just and this is something I do is to be honest, see whenever like it's just something I was taught early on. Like whenever there's like a rook on a file, even if there's stuff in between, I just automatically never put the queen on that file.
Mm.
Even if it's really early and I still have like a knight here, as soon as I see a rook going here, I'll just move the queen off the file because I just don't want to get like it's just an auto reflex that often happens. And it just makes your queens a lot safer. Like in a lot of occasions, you don't fall, you can't run into these discovered attacks for one thing. And also, if there's just some kind of activity that happens in the board, like your queen's not caught up in the crossfire.
Yeah.
I also wonder, like maybe this is some kind of threat as well incoming at some point. That might be why the king moved over, because this is just like a big threat, but they had this immediately. But
Yeah.
yeah, so just general rule is just watch out for these minor pieces in between rooks and queens.
Yeah.
But you won this game because they didn't see it.
Yeah, I expect myself to see that, to be honest.
These things just happen as well. Also, like sometimes if you're just playing, it just depends when you're playing, what time and all the rest of it and everything else. But cool. So this one was a game you played as black, and what decided the game here? I've actually put down a couple of things, so we'll run through it and get your thoughts, and then I can sort of share my observations. But so this was like the Carol variation of the English. So this was the first thing I sort of said is again, like I've got the evaluation bar on there, so it's kind of like a spoiler alert. But just generally speaking, and I don't think you've done this in any other game, so this may have just been this was a 5 minute blitz game. The only reason why I included it today is because you played it yesterday, so I just thought it's fresh in your mind and we'll just talk about it. But you just don't really want to be, and I'm sure you obviously know this, but it's generally not a good idea to exchange off your only active piece. Even though I know in like the Carol or the French structure, this bishop is generally the bad bishop. So you want to exchange it off at some point. But I would recommend like exchanging it off like when it suits you, because in this case you can see it's actually 0-0. So it's fine to do this. This also gives you an extra move to get your bishop, your knight, and castled out. So this was just a very quick exchange, which put them up, even though the position's equal, they're +1 positionally, just because they have maybe the rook's already in a good place to go for this kind of pawn push at some point as well. The queen out as well just really sort of misplaces the queen. This is very dangerous, by the way, as well. Just a general rule. Just always be careful when pawn hunting with your queen, especially when a lot of lines are going to be cut off for your escape. He misses it, so it goes from like +0-0 again. And then from here, I'm just still worried the fact that we've not castled yet, even though it's I don't know if this actually contributes to anything here, but just not being castled is a bit of a concern.
Yeah. I actually like my position right there with the king like that, but
Yeah, I think it's the best position for it now. But obviously, it would have been better to avoid this whole thing where none of these pawns were pushed and you were actually already tucked away.
Yeah.
But so in this, okay, so I'll turn off this eval because your position is actually not too bad, all things considered. But we just have to ask ourselves, like the opponent is really going after this king, and they can't get in right now because your queen obviously looks after the square. But what they have is a way to fork the pawn.
Yeah.
And when you move away, now they can get the rook in potentially at some point. Obviously, this knight, I mean, that's easily exchanged off. And then the rooks come in. And it just gives them a lot of initiative. So they're +5 here. It's when the engine sends sacking the queen is one of the top lines. That's, there's a lot of danger coming in. But the opponent doesn't play into this. And I'm still going over these ideas just so that we can be aware of them, because if the opponent misses it, we still need to be aware of possible threats here. Okay, so let's just talk about why. Okay, so let's just look at this. So I think this is where you played. This is just a one-move blunder. I think you just rook.
Yes.
And again, it's time pressure. So you're down to like 1 minute versus. And it'll be interesting to see where you actually spent your time, because just from what I've seen so far, it tends to be that you spend a lot of time in the opening, disproportionately compared to the end of the game. Okay. And I think you do correctly like analyze the opening and just make sure, like, if I move here, he'll move here, so on and so forth. But what you want to get to a stage is when you're comfortable with the opening, that you basically can blitz those first 10, 15 moves out in like 30 seconds, which you'll build up just by playing the same opening. I think with the Caro-Kann, you're already pretty comfortable that you're able to play those moves quite quickly. But for other positions, like once you're familiar with the openings, it'll give you more time to spend in the middle game.
Yeah, the Caro is the only one I've done a course on. I don't know if you'd recommend any courses on the Rue Lopez. Is there a free one on Chessable? Or?
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I learnt the Roy Lopez by YouTube, to be honest, and then just trying to play it in games, like
Mm.
Blitz games afterwards. Um, and there's all different kinds of variations. I tend to just try and play an opening that's got as least theory as possible. So the Roy Lopez Exchange in particular has a very limited amount of theory because basically once you enter it, the opponent only has so many things that they can do. Whereas if you play a more sort of complex opening, the opponent's got a lot more replies, and you have to be looking out for various different things. In the exchange, it just gives me one simple plan. Basically, that's why I play it. But I just learned that on YouTube, and I learned like quite a lot of stuff like the England Gambit or the Stafford Gambit, all these other openings I play as black. I've learned most of that on YouTube. Um, I've not actually done a course in any opening yet, so I couldn't recommend one specifically, but you can definitely don't underestimate like just the power of YouTube and lectures and all that sort of stuff. Even like kind of like the stuff you're doing for your audience, for even for you yourself, there'll be like a lecture from someone that will be really useful for that kind of stuff. Cool. So going to the next one here.
I keep forgetting, guys. Craig can't actually see me, so I am nodding, Craig. But
Yeah, no worries.
yeah,
Perfect. So you played as white here, and we've got another Roy Lopez on the board, and you did actually play D4 here. So that's
yes,
a good response here. And I think this game, what I wrote down was that basically Black got initiative, and ultimately there's just one tactical mistake that you made that allowed Black to win a piece. Um, but we'll talk about the initiative aspect. So I think here, so by the way, just be careful of this. This is like a classic common tactic in these types of positions. We have the queen and bishop lined up on a bishop that's apparently pinning the knight.
mm.
Is in the Sicilian defense, this is like a very common motif that I do all the time, where basically you're winning a pawn because if you take back, they'll win this, and they've just won this pawn altogether. And if you take there, they're able to defend the knight, so they still win this pawn,
Mm.
basically. But I don't think the opponent sees it. Yeah, so all of a sudden it just looks like right now your pieces are placed quite advanced up the board, and then after a few moves you kind of push back with every move. So that's basically just Black's just got a big space advantage here. They're getting some initiative, but they're still. I mean, the position's still objectively equal, like from an engine standpoint. But that's just there's still a lot of pressure coming from Black, like cramping all your pieces back to normal. So I'd probably be looking to try and exchange something and give yourself a bit more room.
I wanted to play that G4, but I was too much of a pussy to do it.
Before, but that gives you some control back. But I mean, the position's still fine here, to be honest. This pawn drops, and I think this is the moment where it's equal right now. You just have to spend your time to calculate the move order because it's you chose the one. Um, you see there it goes from basically equal to -7 because there's like this knight you want to get rid of this guy first, and there's no sort of threat that Black can do here with that. Whereas with this threat, this move order, it's just that White's able to come in and fork everything, and you can't even take this back. I think actually this is what you did play because of the fork idea.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's just slowing down a little bit just to do like the whole like if I go here, well, what you do quite often in the opening. So you do spend this time in the opening because I've watched your videos. But I think probably what you want to get into the habit of is trying to fly through the opening a bit more,
Okay.
as long as you're comfortable with it and keeping this time for this part of the game, or at least doing the same sort of like if I go here, he goes here, that sort of stuff, and picking different move orders. But this was just simply just a calculation thing, so this is just tactics really, and that's all it takes. This was the whole decider. You were equal position. It was just this one move order, which this happens to everyone. So
Yeah, I took his bad bishop, which wasn't looking at anything, and
yeah,
I opened up his good bishop, which was staring at everything.
yeah. Okay, cool. And then we'll fly through this one. So this one, again, I put this was a Slav. I put the ultimate sort of headline down to two things. I said king safety was one of them. So again, this is probably a game where not castling might have hurt us, and also calculation. So usually when I write calculation, it means just like a one or two move calculation. So we'll look at the critical moment. This is a Slav. Um, yeah, so I think this thing here. So just general feedback I would give is you just want to get into the mindset of I want to castle as soon as I can, or in the first 5 to 10 moves. The long like when you go sort of pawn hunting like this, you just allow them to start going on with their own attack. Even though they've not castled, you're actually in more danger than they are because you don't actually have any pieces that can come out. They've got the bishop to come out and check. They can come in. Like they've just got a lot more going on here. So they find this, and you can't take back because of the fort. Well, actually, you can take back, but you'll lose the book. So you have to allow that to move out, and just I mean that's all. That's often enough of what it takes is just the fact that you're pieced down. You can't really come back.
Yeah.
Often from that kind of thing. I think you probably resign. Okay, yeah. So
I thought on petulantly for a bit.
you can see just like when we time lapse through this, like the contributory factor, in my opinion, was just again not being like obsessed with getting the king safe. Like that's really pretty much in every opening I play. It's like I want to get this king castled as soon as I can, and I know there are some openings you can play, and sometimes you want to develop and everything else. But had that just been part of your sort of mindset of just okay, let's just not get too complicated right now. Let me just castle. Like that entire sequence wouldn't have been on the board.
Yeah.
Because they're able to take advantage of that. So again, it's stuff that you're aware of, but just even here, like so it goes from +1 to +3. It's because you want to be just getting things out, castled as soon as you can. This obviously facilitates getting your pieces out. So you just want to be in that sort of frame of mind of trying to get safe whenever you can, especially when you're playing against like 2100 players, like anyone that's stronger than you.
Yeah.
Just get into that habit, I would say.
I'm playing a Grandmaster tonight, so
are you?
I've never been to a chess club before, but tonight they've got a Grandmaster coming in. I think it's quite a rare event, so I'm going down to meet them all.
Do you know, is it an English GM or do you know who it is?
I can look it up while you're going through this next game if you like.
I can chat afterwards.
Yeah.
But yeah, cool. So we've got two more games to run through. So this one you played white in the Caro, and I think this was just a calculation error as well. So we'll just quickly see at what point that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we just forgot that there was a discovered attack on the bishop. So we played this sort of move here, this A3 move. But that just allows like a 2-on-1 on the bishop after knight takes, queen takes.
Yeah, that sums up what you were saying before, isn't it? Like unnecessary pawn push.
And it's just we're just cautious of trying to play like solid and not let the opponent come in. But sometimes we just have to just take our time a little bit just with that. Like I would just exchange there, to be honest.
Yeah.
I'd probably just exchange there. And if they take, like, you don't have to exchange here, you can if you want. I probably wouldn't. I mean, but like there's just the standard like intuitive moves, getting the rook onto the open file and everything else. But you just have to watch it. And I think this move was, even if this bishop wasn't here and free, rather than this, because even if the knight jumps in here, like you can always kick it away anyway. It's never permanently fixed here. I'd probably be like, okay, the king's still in the center. Let me get the rook out. Let me even jump the knight in here, try and break something open whilst the king's still open. Like just the sort of typical, like, okay, let me take the lead and bring my pieces out and try and go after them, rather than being too worried about, okay, I want to stop him coming after me, and you forfeit a move rather than bringing your rooks in.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's that move there. And I think from there on, like you can't really, I think. Cool. And last game. So this was another endgame. So the endgames came up twice in 10 games. So I don't know how often your games go to endgames, but 20% of the sample, and it's a small sample, so it could be a lot less or it could be a lot more. But I'm a big advocate of studying the endgame as well, especially at your level, particularly rook endings and pawn endings. Those are really the two most common. This one actually happened to be a minor piece endgame, but a lot of the principles from the pawn endgame is still the same, like just the calculating, like if I push here and he pushes there, what happens type thing. So actually the critical moment, this is actually a well-played game throughout the middle game. It's really just when it gets to the very end, just a quick principle. Oh yeah, first things first here. So you exchange, which is fine. I mean, it's still an equal position here. I personally, although the engine doesn't recommend it, I would bring out your rook here. It's like fractionally better. But the idea is, let me just ask you one question. What position is better for you? This position where your rook's blocked and his rook is in the open file, or the other way where if they exchange, their rook is still blocked and your rook is out in the board. So that's really just a simple question of like, let me improve my piece so that if there's a capture, my piece is in a better position. Even though if the rook seems a bit awkward here, it's still on the open file rather than still being here and then them having the open file to potentially come down and start just being awkward, basically.
Yeah.
That's just a minor thing. It does not make any difference to this game, but just as a general rule, if someone attacks one of my pieces, if I can defend it with another piece, or it allows me to activate a piece to defend it, I'll definitely do that.
Yeah, I think the fact that there's 3 open files in this game, maybe not so much, but if there's one open file like that,
Yeah,
especially then.
Yeah. Okay, so all sort of, we'll just keep going down through here. So you can see like that's an equal end game so far. So just one thing that you just have to be aware of, right? Because they blunder this is, again, asking yourself, how can I win and how can I lose? And really, this is the only thing you have to be aware of, right? So just the general sort of thing in these type of endgames is you just want to be able to control the squares that this pawn's going to move down. You can't really control this square after this move because the bishop controls it. So really, it's going to be one of these 2 squares that you can control. So can you think of a move that, like, what do you want to be thinking about or doing here to control that square?
Yeah, I was in 2 minds.
It doesn't have to be one move, but just a general theme of an idea.
Yeah, like king e4. I was also considering, can I push my pawn, but I think their king always blocks. But yeah, king back 1.
King back 1 is fine, yeah, but and also just using your knight, because your knight is basically just ready to come back here. This pawn can never be pushed because the bishop can't defend it for a start. So if they just play a random move, like just king anywhere, your knight's just here forever, and these 2 pawns aren't coming down. And that's like you're holding here, even though you're a pawn down. Like it doesn't really matter what they do. Like you never have to be scared of like this move, kicking your knight. You just take, and even if they take here, doesn't matter because this pawn is not moving. Like this can never kick the knight away, and these 3 aren't going to get past these 3. It'll be fine. Like you can hold this. So it's just this general. And if you ever look at knight endgames, there's this sort of idea with keeping that. Like there's a well-known technique to use one knight to stop a pawn from promoting, even if the king and pawn are like if the king was here and the pawn is here and you have a knight like here. There's like a well-known technique where the one knight on its own can always control and stop a pawn moving because it can always like cover the square and jump away if the king comes, and it can jump back.
Yeah.
And so you can look that up on YouTube, but just look at something like knight versus pawn endgame, and you'll pick up some of the sort of best practices from that. But once you're aware of that, you'll just know generally, okay, this pawn, the only way it can win is by promoting. If as long as my knight can cover these squares, we're sorted. That's your number 1 priority. And then you can continue with trying to hold or going for something somewhere else.
Yeah, it was silly, but I didn't want to put the knight on the edge of the board, but of course jumps back like you just did.
Yeah. But so that was just an end game thing, just by not being aware of how to use the knight, I guess. Because once you look, because you never intuitively like these end game stuff. The reason why you have to study them is because a lot of it isn't intuitive. But once you learn it, it's so easy to it's just a lot easier to remember going forward. But the net result, when I just looked at all 10 of your games, then so calculation played some kind of factor in all of the games to some extent. And the average depth really was like 1.7 moves. So that basically just means that in terms of the calculation for you to bring it to the next level, and you do this throughout the opening anyway, and it could just be a time thing is when it starts to die out in the sort of later stages because you've only got a minute to think. Yeah, so it seems to just be when you get into time trouble, you're not giving yourself that time to just think, okay, if I move here, where will they move? And what will I do in response to that? That's just that one question. So it's just like 1.5 moves ahead, basically. That would have stopped a lot of these. And by the way, when I looked at my own spreadsheet, it's the same thing. It's like the average depth is like 2 moves. So it's not this is standard stuff. It's quite common, but it's just having the discipline to make sure we've got time to ask ourselves this at all parts of the game. But that's why doing tactics and all the rest of it, you build up that pattern recognition so that you don't have to work out stuff over the board. You just recognize the pattern. You're like, okay, I can't take that because of this. Can't take that because of this.
Sure.
Other than that, the general principles, I would have said king safety contributed to 60%. So some of these overlap because it's like there's a mixture of both happening up.
Yeah,
but
that's
definitely
that's a quick win as well. King safety,
Yeah.
I can soon remedy that. Hopefully,
that's something you just want to get into the habit of king safety, like castle as soon as you can. If you look through my games, or any games really, like you probably find most people are castling within 5 to 7 or 8 moves. But even to be honest, getting up to like the 8 to 10 moves is probably quite late for a lot of players. But yeah, I castle just whenever I can. But it just stops a lot of potential issues. And then the end game, and it was only a small sample of 10 games, so 2 games out of the 10 there was some kind of end game play, which you could practice just by drilling some pawn endings or looking at those minor piece things. But generally speaking, just castling and just asking yourself that one extra question will have a big impact. But yeah, definitely be castling and playing a bit more aggressively overall. So like maybe reducing some of those A3, D3 moves and going for the middle.
Kraig, I'm sure I'll be watching this back many times into the future. That was incredible.
Excellent.
My mind's a bit blown, and now I've got to go play. I looked it up. Grandmaster Matthew Turner. Don't know if you've heard of it.
Okay.
Yeah, so joining a local chess club. Hopefully there'll be some live content to come on the channel.
Nice one, yeah, and I think that's going to be really beneficial for your improvement as well. Like I've not yet been to a chess club, but when I had a lesson with a coach, who was like, yeah, you definitely want to do that. Like it'll just make you more engaged in the game in general, and it'll work wonders for your improvement, I think.
Sure. Yeah, I think I might book another lesson sometime soon, Kraig. That was amazing. So
Nice.
everyone go check out Craig's little website. He's got a link in description.
Yeah, and my chess.com username is just Kraig, Kraig. If anyone just wants to shoot me a message, I'd be happy to reply and give advice even for free where I can.
Yeah. All right. Cheers, Kraig. Have a lovely evening. I'll see you
Nice
next
one.
time.
I'll speak to you later.
All right. Cheers. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.